right, everyone. Welcome to our roundtables 2 today on climate, environment, and ecology. Thank you all for being here. We have a very exciting and far-reaching scope of stuff to talk about today, and I'm very excited to talk with these fabulous researchers. So my name is George Babu. I'm one of the advisors on the Leadership Council for the ARCS organization in California. My background is in AI and engineering. Built some robots in the past, and now I'm actually, I would say I've gotten religion, and I'm trying to learn as much as I can about how climate is environment affecting our world and what we can do going forward as individuals, but also as corporations and investors. And so I think we have, first of all, I want to thank you all, each of you researchers, for the incredible work you guys are doing, but also the work you put into the videos on the webpage for the ARC Symposium, the posters you put together. I found it extremely interesting, and I learned a ton about your research from that. They're really well done. So anyone who hasn't seen those yet, please make sure you go to the poster hall for our group and check out the research that these folks have been doing. And a lot of it was a wake-up call to me. So thank you for that. We're going to be chatting for about 30-40 minutes today. We will start with a bit of intros, then we'll do a little bit of reflection of the past year and how what's around us has impacted your research in both positive ways or negative ways, or things you've learned out of it and what the future holds. We'd love to hear about how you have been helped by ARCS. If you have a personal story, we'd love to hear that. And then finally, each of you have a very unique vantage point. You're deep in some research that basically affects all of us. Whether it's pediatric health or whether it's satellite imaging of how the world is changing or evolution on short and long timescales. So the question I want to wrap up the discussion and ask you, each of you, to share what you think are the questions that we all should be asking ourselves over the next 10 years based on your area. So that's going to be the lay of the land today. And I thought we would start with introductions, and we will go, I guess, clockwise on my screen. So I'll call on you to just share, who you are, where you're doing your research, and why you felt compelled to the research that you're doing. And Katherine, I'd love to hear from you first. Over to you.
Thanks, George. Hi, my name is Katherine Corn. I'm a fifth-year PhD candidate at the University of California, Davis. I study macroevolution and biomechanics in fishes. And that's motivated because I'm fascinated by the diversity of life that we have on Earth. It's produced by processes over millions and millions of years. So, thanks.
Thank you, Katherine. And now it's moving on to Pune. You're next on my screen, so over to you.
Hello, I'm Pune Kalhari. I'm a first-year master's student at San Francisco State University, and I'm studying the conservation genetics of Galapagos yellow warblers, specifically how they will respond to climate change. And I'm specifically just interested in looking how human impacts will affect species distributions in the future.
Very interesting. Thank you, Pune. Megan, over to you.
Hi, everyone. I'm Megan Sable. I'm a fifth-year PhD candidate at the University of California, Santa Cruz, and I study this intersection between predators and migratory prey. And my empirical work is looking at juvenile salmon that are out migrating and interacting with fish predators, but I've also done a couple projects that really think about across taxa and doing some broad synthesis.
Thank you, Megan. Anju, over to you.
Hi, yeah, I'm Anju. I'm a first-year master's student at San Francisco State, and I study plant ecology. Specifically, I'm interested in plant functional traits, which are traits that we can use to better understand plant function and also overall plant community function. And I really got interested in this field in undergrad. I took a plant taxonomy class, and just exploring the biodiversity in plant form and function was really eye-opening to me. And I didn't have a whole lot of introduction to the natural world or just studying anything in ecology as a child. So that class was really pivotal for me. And I think it's really powerful, all the ways that we can use plant traits to understand communities and overall ecosystems.
Thank you, Anju. Kelsey, how about you?
Hi, my name is Kelsey Lieberger. I'm a 6th year PhD student at UC Davis. And I study both how the natural environment can shape evolution, really rapid evolution, but also how evolution and variation within a species can affect ecological processes like population dynamics or nutrient recycling.
Thank you, Kelsey. Jean, I'd love to hear about your work.
Hi everyone, I'm a 3rd year epidemiology PhD candidate at UCSF. In my former life before coming here, I worked as a pediatric nurse and got my master's in public health. So I had my clinical background as a nurse, and then during my master's in public health, I really fell in love with data and statistical analysis and all the different ways we can use and learn from data. And so in my PhD program and my research moving forward, my goal was to combine my clinical background with my research background. So my goal in general is to improve pediatric hospital care using electronic health record data.
Thank you, Jean. And last but certainly not least, Sophie, I'd love to hear from you.
Thanks, George. Hi, everyone. My name is Sophie. I said a little introduction earlier in the symposium, but I am a 1st year PhD student at UC Berkeley studying climate change and specifically water and carbon cycling with satellites. What drew me to my field, I guess I've always been interested in climate change, both because I'm scared about what will happen and also curious about the possibility this problem poses. I think that there's a lot of innovation and exciting questions to be asked in this field. So I think it was a mix of curiosity and maybe fear about what will happen if we don't do anything to address climate change. Yeah.
Yeah, Sophie, I share both your curiosity and the terrifying fears, but also some optimism. So I saw this and with your research. One of the things I did notice, like how interrelated some of your research was, and you know what kind of questions it causes us to all ask. So I thought you know we had a very interesting year, maybe one of the most interesting years in our short lifespans. I thought I'd love to hear from you what this year has how this year has affected your work. Has it made your work harder? Has it made some things easier? Is there any silver linings you found? So I think I'd just love to hear from you how COVID has affected your research. Who wants to?
Well,
oh, Jean,
now everyone knows what an epidemiologist is, for one. So we'll take that as a win. But ironically, a lot of epidemiology has been focused on like causal inference, the causes of disease rather than infectious disease. So I don't know that much about COVID, which is funny. So, but in terms of my own research, I definitely have had it easier than many of you who go into the field or go into labs because I'm able to do my data analysis at home alone, sad and alone in front of my computer.
Sophie, how about your work? I mean, you're also doing data analysis. So how's that? You had a similar experience?
Yeah, very similar to Jean's. I just am coding all day. So I sometimes get, my Wi-Fi isn't that good at home sometimes. So that's probably been the biggest issue. But I think one thing I'm really excited to do when I can travel again more freely is to visit some of the sites I'm working with, because although I do satellite data, I'm also working with some in situ ground-based measurements. So it will be great to finally get to go to those sites and actually see the place where the data is coming from that I'm working with. I think it will give me a lot more information and context on my work. So it's definitely been challenging to try to understand what's going on the ground in some locations just by reading papers or looking at pictures or some satellite imagery. And I think actually being in a place physically and seeing the landscape can be so helpful, especially for environmental research. and also to meet some people who live nearby and get a sense of the local context and what that land might mean to the people who live nearby it.
Megan, have you had to go out of the field? Has that for your research work?
You know, I'm similar. I'm towards the end, so my field work was already done. But I would kind of expand just to say the hard thing for me, I'm just writing and coding, but I'm in the end of projects. So some are in review and I'm in these kind of hard, somewhat critical, right? You're going back and forth. And I think it's been hard not to have the social support as much in COVID. So those things, I would say mentally, it's just harder to work through those. And it's been nice that ARCS is that little like, hey, they, you know, support us and kind of give us that external support, which has been great. So I've missed that. And I think that's subtle, but has made a big difference for me. And then also on the same way, even when some things have come through that are good, it's not quite as fun to celebrate without some of those social, so I've just missed kind of that social support through the challenging ending phase of projects.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. I thought I was an introvert before COVID. Now I realize, no, I like people, I miss people. So can't wait to get out there. Have you, as you watch how COVID, how the science has been communicated, how politicians and companies and people have responded, have you had any learnings for your own work or your own research or any implications for your work in the future?
I guess it's not super related to the COVID press, but it was the first time I was contacted by the press to talk about my research. And so that was a learning experience of how do you translate your work into both to retain sort of those basic facts, but also, you know, capture the audience's interest.
Yeah, there's been definitely been a lot of science miscommunication. So understanding how to communicate science properly definitely has been interesting. I found it interesting. COVID has been interesting for me, almost like a mini dry run of what climate change could be over a longer time frame, like just like the next few decades, but compressed into a year. How do people respond and all that? So I'm hoping to learn from that. And any, what are you all looking forward to the next year? The country's almost vaccinated and soon things will open up. Anything that you plan to do as soon as things open up?
It sure sounds exciting to me to go to a real conference. Not that these virtual ones haven't been, you know, people have done a great job adapting, but, you know, you can get fatigued when you do a lot of conferences, but I'm ready to go to some now.
One thing for me that's pretty optimistic, but it's not super immediate. I'm hoping to graduate in a year. And I look ahead to that and I think a lot about it, and I think about whether my exit seminar is going to be virtual, and I really want it to be in person. really want to fly all my family in to watch me graduate.
Knock on wood. Let's hope that happens for you, Katherine. Katherine, I'd love to. I think you had mentioned something in your poster about how ARCS had helped your research. I'd love to hear from you, like how, in what ways ARCS has been able to support you in your work.
Yeah, ARCS has been incredible for me. Actually, so sort of as everything was remote, my partner and I were able to go live with his family in Belize for a period of time because we weren't having to be in person. And then because of that, I actually was able to take videos that I think I would be able to use for my research. So that was an aspect of my work that I had never expected. And I was really only able to do it because I was supported by ARCS that quarter. So it's been very special for me.
Oh, that's awesome. Awesome to hear. Megan, you had mentioned that ARCS has been supporting you in a social way. I didn't fully catch that.
Oh, I'm not sure. I mean, really just, I think the ARC support has been, great for that motivation and that belief. And then just like some extra financial stability in a very uncertain year with so much going on. So that, again, really does mean a lot.
Very cool. Well, thank you all. I'm going to shift gears and we'll talk a little bit about the research that you've been doing. One of the questions that came up in one of the earlier chats was directed at Sophie. Sophie, your work looks at a lot of data on what's happening in the Earth, but where does the data come from? Like, who has been able, which satellite platforms have been able to share that data with you?
There are so many options out there. There are companies, there are governments. Well, I guess those are the two major options. But for example, NASA has dozens of satellites and they all have different qualities and aspects. Some are located on the International Space Station, for example, and orbit every 90 minutes or so around the Earth. Others are geostationary and just see a whole hemisphere at a time. So primarily I work with data from NASA, but there are more and more companies that are also putting satellites up into space. So yeah, I think there's just a ton of data out there, which is really exciting. Sometimes it can almost be like information overload because a lot of these products have so much potential, but there's still a lot of questions about what they're actually showing and how to work with the data. So it's an interesting field that's growing really quickly, and there's a lot of questions to be asked about how to use these different satellite products.
Interesting. I mean, that ties into another question that also came up earlier, was as you look at these kind of big data studies on a planetary scale or even a population level ecological scale, like what are the big data issues that you're starting to see that we'll have to tackle?
Gosh, that's a really good question. And I'm sure that the other people here today could also have many thoughts on this. I think that one issue is kind of connecting some of the data that we're collecting to people on the ground and communities. I think it's an interesting thing to be observing people from above and collecting data on communities that they may not actually know is being collected. So this is kind of an interesting question for me about data sovereignty and data privacy too. I think that there's an interesting connection there. A lot of work has been done thinking about AI, for example, and algorithms and how those might reproduce systemic biases. And so I think it's kind of, there's some similar questions and parallels to be drawn with big data collection, especially environmental data that's looking at land and might be studying places that people might not be realize are being monitored. So that's one question I'm kind of curious about in my own work, and I've been reflecting on. How do you try to maintain accountability to communities whose lands you're studying if you don't physically have to go there or even let them know that you're collecting data about them? Does anyone else have any other thoughts on this question? It's a great one.
Jean, do you come across these issues? You look at, especially because patient data in these broad studies.
Yeah, so I mean, I think it all depends on like what level of data you're using. So you can use, for example, de-identified data that has no patient names or birth dates. They shift the date of hospitalizations or office visits. And for that data, you don't need an IRB approval at all. So no ethical review. Versus obviously if you're using data that can be traced back to patients, there's more ethical considerations. But even that, you can get approval to use it without necessarily having to contact those patients for their consent. So there could be arguments about privacy in that realm too.
I'm curious if others of you have been running into kind of those kinds of questions of the data that you're using for your studies.
I guess the fish don't have to give consent.
Fish are fine. But I do use sort of big data, and the problem that we have is processing power. I'm part of a team that has collected a massive data set, and I think I'm studying like a sixth of it because it's the only way that you can get models to run, because everything is just so big. I think in some ways we're still sort of catching up institutionally with what we're able to produce.
And sorry, Katherine, is this like a technology limitation, or is it just what technology you have, capacity you have access to?
It's both the technology capacity that you have access to, and it's also the models that we're able to use. You know, the models that we have are built for, you know, maybe 40 lines of data or 100 lines of data, not 6,000. And when you study millions and millions of years, that ends up being a huge, huge, huge model, and that takes a very long time.
That's pretty mind-boggling, actually. Wow, that is mind-boggling. I wanted to, along the lines of the research and maybe looking more into the future. I am curious, like what you know, what are from your vantage point, you're seeing the world in a very unique way. What questions do you think us in the lay audience should start asking ourselves based on what you're seeing out there on the frontiers? And maybe we'll start with Pune. I'm wondering if you had any thoughts on what you wish people would be asking more often based on what you're seeing.
I guess in terms of my own research, I think people should definitely, one, a lot of species are being displaced, which is a focus of my research, but with climate change, a lot of people are also being displaced, whether that's due to rising sea levels or in California, we've seen such an increase in wildfire that it may make a lot of very densely populated areas of the world inhabitable, and that will probably increase population density in places where people are able to live that are habitable. But that also raises the question of, well, with increased population density, will we see a increase in competition for resources or an increase of maybe more pandemics, which I think are questions that can be applied to both humans and other species affected by climate change.
Interesting. And Kelsey, you had a question you thought we should be asking more about in our conversations about climate change. Love to share more of that.
I guess, yeah, one question I think people should be asking is, what is our baseline? That ecological things are super variable. As we saw from, was it your talk, Sophie, of just year to year variation can be orders of magnitude. And so figuring out just like what should we be comparing to is a place to start.
And probably a very controversial question too, very politically tinged potentially. I've been told we're actually coming out of time, so I thought maybe I'd like to hear from maybe one or two more folks about what questions you think we should be asking. Anyone has a burning question you think we should be asking?
I have one coming out from what I've ended with my PhD stuff, which maybe I'll pursue next. But we have all these top predators that are often, we exploited them and now they're all recovering. But often those predators eat and consume migratory prey, which we also care about. And so it's this super interesting dynamic because their recovery of top predators is a success story, but it's starting to have these new conservation challenges. And so I think it's super interesting to understand how does that work? And I think we need to really think about how we can support both of those populations sustainably in the future. So that's one I'm interested in potentially investigating myself in the future.
It's a very, very interesting question. Not one we've thought about for sure. I mean, Anna's, who's not here today, her work is on pumas and puma populations. That would have been an interesting question to ask her. But maybe we have a minute or so left. I'd love to hear if anyone else has a question that you really think we should be asking ourselves right now.
I would say we should be thinking about how we can apply a lot of basic science to conservation and land management. I think a lot of the times what I see is a lot of really interesting questions are being asked within academia and within science. And it seems that oftentimes there isn't a place for that information to go in terms of actionable items. And so, yeah, I think there's so much information that we already have that really isn't being incorporated into the way that we interact with the environment on, like statewide scales or regional scales.
That's a very good question. Thank you, Anju. And we are now at time for this panel. So first off, I want to thank each of you for the incredible research you're doing. expanding our understanding of climate effects and ecology and pediatric care and all kinds of important areas. So thank you all for that. And thank you for the wonderful videos and poster boards you put together. Whoever hasn't seen those yet, head on over to the poster board section of the website and have a look. They're really awesome, and share them with your friends too. And with that, thank you all for joining, and I'm going to hand it back to the ARC Symposium folks.